as a highly personal journey.
They stole my thunder.
Well, you are so good
great.
on your feet that you'll create new thunder.
I tell you, I'm jazzed. I'm excited because, so one thing, I want to start at the beginning. 6 years ago, in 2009, I wrote a blog post about garbage in my medical record. And 3 days later, the Boston Globe called and said, we think this is important. We want to write about it. I didn't realize I'd stepped in a policy mud puddle in Washington, D.C. They put it on the front page. People have said if what happened after that was a Disney movie, everyone would say this only happens in Disney movies, you know, because there's the blogger there, and then the newspaper calls, and they put it on the front page. And that was a week before a conference in Boston, and people from Washington were there, and a month later I was testifying at policy meetings. It's crazy stuff. Well, my life started spinning out of control over this, and a man named Gunther Eisenbach, who happens to be in the room here today, said, would you give the opening keynote at my Medicine 2.0 conference in this building? First keynote speech I ever gave in healthcare. Gunther, are you here? There he is, yes. Well, so get this. So my life's spinning out of control. I mean, I was just fresh out of cancer, as you'll hear. And I didn't know what was happening. And he said, I need to know for the conference publicity, what do you want the speech to be called? And I had never been asked that question before. And he just kept asking. And I eventually said, I don't know, just call it, give me my damn data, because you guys can't be trusted. And he did. And that is where that slogan has come from. And as you'll see, it's taken on a bit of a life of its own. I just want to say, I mean, so many speakers have already said what I was going to say. I just want to jump to the bottom line. I got myself 3D printed, you know, because this technology that's coming along here. You know, I worked, as those of you who were at the reception last night heard, I used to work in the typesetting machine industry. And if you want to talk about an industry that changed, right, and of course, the first thing that happened when desktop publishing came along was everyone in the industry said, you people don't know what you're doing. You can't handle the Helvetica, you know? And it turns out y'all got smarter. Right? And this is exactly what Lucian and Mike are talking, what everybody's talking about. And it is a mistake to think that if people are not good at something, they can never get good at it. When you see a competitor or an old mind thinking that way, that is a gaping door for you to race through and innovate and leave them in the dust. I got myself printed. Well, see, 3D printing, everybody knows it's happening in big high-end things. I mean, they emailed a wrench to the International Space Station a couple months ago. Did you see that? They needed a wrench, and it didn't exist, so they did a drawing and emailed it and printed it. Well, that's expensive stuff, but I know, like in laser printing, desktop publishing, prices came down and quality went up. So I've been waiting for when will there be a consumer version of 3D printing. And at Christmas a year ago, at the shopping mall, there was a stand that said, 3D print yourself. And I'll be darned, I went and did it. This one cost $45. The quality's not that great, but there's going to be a lot of me. Well, what e-patients want is what they want me to talk about. Well, I'll explain what e-patients means and why they need to be empowered. I want to say that at the same time that all that Boston Globe stuff happened, I was involved in founding the Society for Participatory Medicine. Are there any members here in the house? Woohoo, several of us. Notice the symbol is a handshake. It's about patient-provider collaboration. It does not say patients know everything. It says let patients help, which happens to be the title of the book that I wrote with my primary care provider, Dr. Danny Sands. If you're involved in electronic medical records with your physician, notice the thing you want is a triangle, the two of you looking together at the computer. Well, I did a TED Talk. So shortly after all this stuff happened in 2009, Lucian Englund, who I'd never heard of, and at that time his Twitter name was Zorg, which is like some science fiction thing. Well, that's Dutch for health. I didn't know that. Anyway, he said, I'm going to do a TEDx, and I want to have patients be most of the speakers. Will you be the first one? So I said yes, and that happened. And much to my amazement, it's had almost 500,000 views. And it ends with the chant, "Let patients help, let patients help." Well, you know, the first slide said this. This is the year of patients rising. And it was amazing to hear so many patient voices on the stage that day telling their stories. It was unprecedented. And one of my first principles, and I commend every one of you to get this into your skull if you don't already know it, patient is not a third-person word. It is a grotesque mental error and a business disaster if you think about patients as the people who are out there walking down the sidewalks. Because I'm here to tell you, from my own cancer experience, this is coming to your breakfast table, all right? And so I'm talking about the person who lives in your bathrobe in the mornings, because it changes how you look at everything. Well, lesson 2 here, from 40 years in business, you can tell a lot about a futurist by how their predictions pan out, all right? A lot of us here are in the business of prognosticating and so on. Well, so I'm going to go back and look at that TED Talk from 4 years ago and see how things have panned out. Well, I said in 1969, when I was 19 years old, humanity landed on the moon for the first time. That was the first photo ever taken of the Earth from elsewhere. A few weeks later, Woodstock happened. This was a crazy time to be 19 years old, let me tell you. And that fall, the whole Earth catalog was published, and for historical authenticity, those of you who've seen the TED Talk will know this. Here's a picture of me from that summer. I was, in fact, a full-bore hippie. So in the process of being a full-bore hippie, though, don't ask what that pipe is sticking out of my mouth. But I also learned what empowerment is. All right, we'll come to that. And a few years later, Tom Ferguson came out of Yale Medical School, and he was the medical editor of the Whole Earth Catalog, which was about hippies teaching each other how to build their own house, grow their own food, be self-sufficient, be responsible for themselves. Well, he later went on to form the e-patient movement in the 90s, saying e-patients are equipped, engaged, empowered, and enabled. Now, how has that panned out in the last few years? Well, 2 years ago in Montreal, I spoke at the World Parkinson's Congress and picked up something phenomenal, a definition of empowerment. Increasing the capacity of individuals or groups to make choices, right? This is empowering people, and to transform those choices into actions and outcomes. Now, if you do that, somebody has become empowered. It raises the question, how do we do this? You know whose definition this is? It's the World Bank. It's the definition they use in developing nations for taking people who have no concept of how to do things. It maps perfectly onto patient engagement. Lesson 3 is obvious in every industry except healthcare. You're hearing talk about it here today. People perform better when they're informed better. In industry, I worked in marketing, so I like cheesy rhyming slogans, right? Well, here we go. That's what my book mostly contains is slogans, you know. Patient's not a third-person word, you know. People perform better when they're informed better. Now, there's a corollary here because a lot of people in medicine think patients can't handle the truth. Like, well, or, you know, this stuff is too complicated. Do you know what I had to go through to get my medical degree? Well, it's true, but see, what's starting to happen now is innovators are latching onto the data and making it pretty and understandable. It's perverse to keep people in the dark and then call them ignorant. Todd Park, the former Chief Technology Officer of Health and Human Services in the US, said, data liberation. Let the data free. I spoke at an AHRQ Innovator Conference a few years ago. I said to innovators, data is fuel. The best engine in the world will get no results if it doesn't have fuel. So, like, free the data. Well, very short summary of my story. In January 2007, I had a shoulder x-ray, just a routine shoulder x-ray. Totally by coincidence, it showed what turned out to be a tumor of kidney cancer in my lung. Turns out I had tumors everywhere, including, before my treatment started, I had one growing out of my tongue muscle. I was really sick, and to make a long story short, all this is on the website, my median survival at diagnosis was 24 weeks. Well, my doctor recommended a patient community. Today, that doesn't seem so crazy, but this was 8 years ago. And to make another long story short, 2 years ago, the British Medical Journal, so like, how has this panned out? This is the question. Well, the British Medical Journal invited me to submit an essay about the quality of information that I got on that website. And because I don't just sit here and say, well, I'm a patient, so you all ought to just listen to me, period. I know the BMJ is going to be read by a lot of doctors. So I asked my oncologist, what would you say to other physicians? Look what he said. You are really sick, and I don't know if you could have tolerated enough medicine if you hadn't been so well prepared. The treatment that I got was the only thing at the time that could ever cure kidney cancer, but 4% of patients died of side effects. Me, being an empowered patient, I didn't just sit back and say, I hope I'm not one of those. I said, what can I do to prepare? All right, and there was nothing in the literature, but I turned to the patient community and got 17 firsthand stories, which my oncologist says, right, is he thinks helped save my life. Now this leads directly to the paradigm-popping question. We're all taught, trust the scientific method. If there's no evidence, it's snake oil. Well, so how can it be that better information than the literature actually did exist in a patient community that was not managed by physicians? Well, long story short, from my TEDx Maastricht slide, I said these social networks, these social network connections exist. Well, let me point out the dotted lines here we have since figured out are exactly analogous to capillaries in the body. Information is like a nutrient. It enables a healthier response where it's present. And these social media connections are like the capillaries that enable the flow. So something has changed, which is important. Well, and in fact, Lucian's University models it this way. And he and I did not compare our slides in advance, so we're just naturally aligned. In the old days, all useful knowledge flowed from top to bottom because it only existed at the top. It flowed in a one-way direction. Today we have Health 2.0, where it flows in both directions, and the world we're moving to is Health 3.0, where we're all swimming in a common pond of information. If you are here because of some sort of information innovation, it's really important that you understand and enable this. All these slides will be available online. We now understand that the mechanism here, right, is that all these networks of networks are enabling a kind of information flow. People who were trained and have not updated their thinking in the last 30 years will be out of touch with reality and say this is not possible. The reality is that the closed system has become an open network. And in fact, the BMJ ran another piece this winter where we showed this graphic and had an animation of the effect it has. The impact on human lives is unspeakable. This is Regina Holiday. She tried getting information for her husband who had kidney cancer using the 1.0 method. Had a horrible experience. He ended up dying, but in the process, toward the end, when it was too late for him, she bumped into a friend who said, "How are you doing?" And she said, "Doing terrible. Fred's dying of kidney cancer." And she said, "Kidney cancer? I know a guy on Twitter." On Twitter, all right, which turned out to be me. Long story short, within 36 hours, she was talking to my oncologist in Boston, which she had not gotten connected to. He died, and she has turned her loss into advocacy. Having no other resources, she's been expressing herself as a painter. She now paints people's medical stories on their jackets. This is her painting of the phone call where she met me while her son was clinging to her. There are almost 400 of these jackets now. And she is next month having her second, she lives in Western Maryland, hours from anywhere. She's having her second event called Cinder Blocks. She's been called, some people have called her the Norma Ray of healthcare. Other people have called her the Rosa Parks of healthcare. Well, you know it's a revolution when the artists and musicians show up, okay? Well, I mean, this is significant because, you know, remember, we're talking about futurists here, and are we seeing the future or are we just hallucinating? Well, so in my TED Talk, if you saw it, Lucian convinced me. I was backstage waiting. Most people don't know this. Waiting to go on, just shaking the nerves off. Because, you know, if you want to be nervous as a speaker, you know, when you've got 12 TED video cameras looking up your nose, and it's just... Anyway, I said, you know, a guy wrote an e-patient rap. He said, oh, what's it like? And he said, I did it. And he said, oh, you have to do that. I said, no. Well, anyway, I did it. And it was like... I just want to recreate a moment of this here. Boom, 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 boom. I want to be an e-patient just like Dave. Give me my damn data because it's my life to save. And they... Child of the 60s, I watched the artists and musicians show up. There's more stories about that. Well, how's that turned out? Well, ladies and gentlemen, this cultural multimedia stuff has gone mainstream. Eric Topol himself did a mashup of Jerry Maguire, where Cuba Gooding is saying, Jerry, show me the data. And at the end of it, he says, good, you can still be my doctor. Well, and meanwhile, there's some Deloitte guys here did this song, Give Me My Damn Data. They're more polite. They made a data about me. It was like, oh, one for the doctor, two for the nurse. She's saying they're trying to treat me so to make me feel worse. Give me my damn data. Well, here's Todd Park doing the data liberation, right? And in fact, Ross has gone on and done another song, the guy who did the Deloitte song. Let's see if it'll play through the sound system here. This was not my idea. Alice's Restaurant.
All I want is a PHR, just like e-patient Dave. All I want is a
PHR, just like e-patient Dave. All my information in the right configuration, so I can choose to share it anywhere across the nation.
All I want is a PHR.
Well, I'm not just doing this for entertainment value. I want you to see, no kidding, culture is shifting. Expectations are shifting. And the same as with the women's movement that I lived through 50 years ago. There are a whole bunch of people who aren't seeing it yet. There are other people who are seeing the future. As we learn these new dancing lessons, we start to step on each other's feet, but we move forward because things that we didn't know were possible are possible. And here's a huge thing. This is a shocker in any pre-digital industry. When assets digitize, things change fast. In my TED Talk, I showed that I had used visiblebody.com to understand a tumor that was popping out of my kidney. And I thought, holy cow, why not have Google Earth for my body? Well, I now have open source radiology viewing software in my Mac, so I can call up my scans and look at things and do 3D reconstruction on my Mac with free open source software for this. And once the data gets liberated, you know what you can do? You can pull it out and move it around and look. I emailed it to Lucian, and he 3D printed my lungs and tumors.